You're listening to Protect It All, where Aaron Crow expands the conversation beyond just OT, delving into the interconnected worlds of IT and OT cybersecurity. Get ready for essential strategies and insights. Here's your host, Aaron Crow.
Hey, Joseph, welcome to the show. Man, I know I said this before, but it looks like you're a mad professor there with your background and everything. And some of the conversations we have, it actually fits. So I'm excited for this episode. So why don't you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. My name's Joseph Perry, and for $1 billion, I will ransom back the moon. So I work for Morgan Franklin Cyber, the Cyber Fusion Center specifically, where I manage, within the Fusion Center, I manage incident response, threat intelligence, and purple teaming activities. I also, on the company's behalf, do a lot of things in this very nebulous and complex world we call AI. So my career started out in the U.S. Navy, the National Security Agency, a little over a decade ago now, about 12, 13 years ago. I started out as a very technical engineer, a programmer, sort of first and foremost, C++, even like x86 assembly kind of programming. Over my time at the NSA, I really interested in emerging technology and specifically the security implications of emerging technology. So, this is 10 years ago. So emerging technology then would be like Bitcoin and the last time that we were talking about AI, big data, stuff like that. So that was my area of interest at the time. I left the NSA about 6 years ago. Since then, I've done a lot of consulting, a lot of pen testing. I've taught a lot of courses online for programming and stuff like that. And yeah, most of my time is spent doing either incident response or some sort of security simulation, whether that's red teaming, purple team, whatever the case may be.
Awesome. Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, obviously this industry and cybersecurity is such a big topic now that, back in the day, NSA and three-letter organizations, they were all considering those things. The general population wasn't always necessarily up to speed, especially in the OT world. In critical infrastructure and all that kind of stuff, red teaming, a lot of that stuff. Maybe we heard it, but it was from the outside. Like every individual person in a company wasn't thinking about cybersecurity, which now the good thing, I think, is that I think more and more people understand cybersecurity has to do with them. It's not just somebody else's problem. I need to maintain my cyber, whether it's at work or at home and all of those things in between. So it's amazing how far it's come in a short amount of time.
Absolutely. Even looking at, 2017, 2018, when I started doing consulting and got out of the government, I spent a lot of my time convincing companies that they might be the target of a cyber attack. It wasn't even on the level of these are the tools you need to employ or these are the security steps you need to take. It was on the level of, yes, you might be targeted. And the rise of ransomware obviously has really kind of helped put aside any of those uncertainties or concerns. But you're absolutely right that it's relatively recent that the very idea of cybersecurity as core function has really caught on.
Yeah, I've had a lot of those conversations too, and they're like, well, why would anybody want to attack me? Like, we're nobody. We're just this small XYZ company in the middle of nowhere. Why would anybody want to attack me? I'm not critical infrastructure. I'm not, I'm not CIA. Like, I'm none of those things. Like, I sell milk or whatever the thing is that they do. But to your point, it's like, people don't care. Like, they're going after money. Like it's opportunity. It's if I can do something and I can take action on it, then I'm going to do it. Unfortunately, that's the space that we're in. It's like, you leave your car unlocked and $100 bill on the dash. Somebody might walk by and grab it, right? Because it's there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something I like to kind of liken it to. People always talk about, most sharks don't actually like the taste of humans. But that makes me worried because the shark has to find out it doesn't like the taste of it. Right. So just because you may be right, you may not actually have anything useful to the attacker. The attacker may well compromise you, hit you with ransomware, and find out that you don't have enough to pay them. In which case, you just go out of business. The ransomware doesn't not happen as a result of that. You just suffer the worst possible consequences. And we see that. And now that we've started seeing that in the news, we've started seeing that being, accurately covered and it's really unfortunate that, schools and healthcare organizations have gone out of business as a result of this. I definitely never want to say like that's a good thing or anything like that. But the one silver lining is now when someone says, well, we just make pencils. Why would anyone ever attack us? We can say, well, here's the last pencil company that said that. Here's what happened to that. Which isn't a great place to be, but it is useful to have a genuine demonstrable to give to someone. I got into cybersecurity because every computer I've ever touched has broken to pieces, and I figured I might as well weaponize that. There's nothing, and a lot of it's just because I have a suffix in my name, but every database I've ever been entered into has just errored out and failed. So yeah, I am sure that somehow I broke something logging into this, and it's totally my fault.
That's awesome. I mean, I actually want to use that in the podcast because honestly, it's important to understand. Like, same thing with me. Like, I didn't start out. I didn't drive towards getting into cybersecurity I graduated high school in 96. I'm old. But I was, I took our library when I was in high school. I was very computer savvy. I had a computer from a very young age, Tandy or a Trash 80 IBM or the Radio Shack version, right? Yep. Tape player as the program would fast forward and hit play. That Mac over there is one of my first computers. It actually still works. But yeah, I was just the technology guy. Like it just came naturally to me. It worked really well. I never really did much programming. It was more around the infrastructure side and kind of connecting them all together and kind of using them. I took the library, our high school library, from the old school catalog, index cards and took that to a computerized barcode system, right? While I was there, that was as my senior year, I worked in the library and converted us all over. And I'm the one that set it all up and all the users and all that kind of stuff. And then that kind of transitioned. I went into college as an electrical engineer. And then I was working and it was really, the internet and the technology boom was really happening. And there was so much going on. And then through that, working in infrastructure and networking and systems integration, all that kind of stuff, the configuration piece, again, we didn't call it cybersecurity, but I was a domain exchange admin for AT&T and these different places. So I was doing security, but again, we didn't really call it cybersecurity. It was just, you were making sure that, Bob in accounting didn't have access to the non-accounting environments and vice versa and all that kind of stuff. And then that just kind of grew and grew and grew. And then it became this whole other thing that, online and hackers and all this different type of stuff, especially from a public facing perspective. But a lot of that time I was working in manufacturing and critical infrastructure, and all that stuff was just air gapped. And it was, security by obscurity. It was these one-off systems and they weren't the same things. But as we started bringing those things into these environments, commercial off the shelf stuff into these OT environments, we started having the same problems that they were having in the IT space. And we unintentionally brought those things into the OT world. And we're like, oh crap, what we need to fix this. This is a problem. I remember doing a control system and the vendor actually gave us a proposal. And it's when I was an asset owner, and he gave us a proposal, and it was the secure version or the insecure version. And that was the proposal titles. Yep. Do you want the secure version or the insecure version? And the insecure version was obviously like $100,000 cheaper. And the plant wanted the insecure version because it was cheaper. And I'm like, you can't choose the insecure version. Like, that's not an option.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things I joke a lot. Like, I have a unique insight because I came up as a programmer. I have a unique insight into how exploits become possible and how vulnerabilities happen. Right. And pretty consistently, a vulnerability doesn't happen because it's some new, incredibly advanced technique that no one's ever heard of. We get a vulnerability because somebody refuses to change the tech stack they've been using for 30 years. Yep. And God help them, you're not going to make them change their library either. Right. It's sort of the joke that there are still people out there who are trying to upgrade from Python 2 to Python 3. But it's as technology gets adopted into a new area, that area kind of starts on the back foot and has to like speed run learning all of the hard lessons that we learned the first time we do it. So when we brought IT into the OT world, they had to speed run learning all the problems that we learned in IT. I mean, kind of in the same thing when we actually built cybersecurity up as an industry, it went through all the same problems that IT went through, where nobody took it seriously, nobody who was involved in it, who understood it technically, was able to talk to business leaders. All of those same growing pains kind of happen. And it's that sense of technological adoption is powerful and useful, and it's sort of inevitable in most industries, but it also carries with it kind of those same problems that it had the first time it got adopted, wherever it was first innovated into.
Well, and the irony is, and I know some of the things that I want to get into with you is talking about AI and IR and threat and all those different categories. But the irony is, specifically in a lot of these areas, and it's IT and OT, I think it's just maybe a little bit more extreme on the OT side. But, you've got folks that are 40-year-old technology, the stuff that was installed 40 years ago, it hasn't been patched. It hasn't been changed. It's exactly the way that it was when it was installed 40 years ago, all the way up to people talking about how do I use AI in my, to enhance my manufacturing line, right? And everything in between. So you've got this vast difference of cutting edge, bleeding edge capabilities and looking to, enhance and update and all that type of stuff, to people that are just continuing, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Like, they're running their old pickup truck truck that they've been running. It's got 1 million miles, and they're not going to get a new a fuel injected engine, right? It's that far difference between them. And as cybersecurity professionals, and in this vast world, and obviously hackers as well, we have to be able to look at and protect all. Like, we can't just expect everybody in the world, in OT environments, IT environments, to just upgrade to the latest and greatest across their entire organization, because it'd be super expensive, hard, all of those things. So we have to be able to protect where we're at. And the answer is not always, especially in OT, it's not always just patch. It's not always just upgrade the control system or the Windows machine or the network switch or whatever the thing is that's old and archaic. Sometimes it's like, okay, I can't do that. So how else can I protect this thing?
What mitigating controls can I put in place?
Right.
Yeah, and I think that point that you hit on there is such a critical one, and it gets into what we'll talk about with AI. I have clients that I go to, and I'm talking to them about using laps and removing local admin privileges for most of their users. And then I have clients that if I go to, and if I brought that to them, they'd be like, oh, you're not a serious security professional. You're talking to me about security measures from 15, 20 years ago. Why are you bringing this up to me? Like, I need you talking to me about Cribble and how I can minimize my Splunk input and how I can reduce costs and how I can improve my analytics and my dashboard. Like, that's what I'm here to talk to you about.
Right.
But if I go back to that first client, I was like, so here's the Cribble implementation that I think makes sense for you. They're going to lose that. They're going to start screaming it, because like they're not even in the cloud yet, let alone needing to worry about data input and managing the volume. And so it's not only do you need to be able to change that context within your own kind of mind and understand these are the solutions best suited to this problem state, but you also, within the industry, we have this kind of constant push where there's a chunk of the industry, and I love them, they're very near and dear to my heart, who are just interested in the most advanced research, who are just doing the hardest red teams, who are just doing, and that's great stuff. But when I talk to those folks, I'm like, I can't take that to any of my clients.
Right.
They're not going to understand a word I love this. I love your results. I'm so glad you did this. But like, I can barely explain it to my junior analyst, let alone a CISO who's going to have to make purchasing decisions based on it. And so much of our challenge is changing context in sort of this matrixed sense of not only is it how mature the organization is, but it's also based on what kind of needs they have. Are their needs extremely technical? Are their needs extremely procedural? Are they about, we don't really have that many data assets that we need to have this complex attack chain for. We really need our people to stop paying out fake invoices and stuff like that. So there's just all of these different sort of ideas that are I think of them mentally as sort of tags, but these different things you need to associate with a given client or a given environment. That is, this is the way that I have to approach this. These are the problems that I need to solve for them. And it's just a wild constellation of potential problems that you might get from space to space.
Yeah, absolutely. And you talked about something really important there, and it ties right into the AI, talking about Cribble and how much data I'm sending in and adjusting. And I think that's the bigger piece is you talk to these CISOs and they hear these buzzwords on LinkedIn or in the newspaper or their vendors are telling them, it's like, every product you have has an AI label on it, right? I've got AI. Like, what does it do? I don't know, but I've got AI in it. Is it actually something I need? Is it enhancing something? Not really sure. But as we look through this, it's no different than any other product. It's like, I actually did a podcast and a post the other day, and it was around, there's an OT, Forrester, OT product that Forrester put out, and, there was top right quadrant and all the different things, but it was such a generic view of it. It was like you had, networking products, firewalls, and with, compliance tools, and they were rating them against each other. And it's not really a fair rating. It's like rating an 18-wheeler with an Apple. Like, yeah, the 18-wheeler is better at hauling equipment, but it's not going to taste good.
But if you bite out of it, you're going to hurt yourself. Yeah.
They're just not the same product. They're not even the same category. Like, yes, they're both in the OT industry, but they're not really a fair comparison.
They're solving different kinds of problems from different spaces. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So AI I see as a huge one. So let's dive into that. Like, where do you see AI being an impact in cybersecurity? And I know there's a lot of different ways, and obviously we can't hit them all, but what are some of the bigger ones that you see being a benefit to folks, no matter where they are in that tech stack? Are they the guy that doesn't have the admin? They're still logging in as admin, or people that are, more advanced down the road in their cyber journey?
Yeah, that's a great question. So without getting into the whole technical history of AI, which I love talking about and would happily do for hours and hours, one fact that really needs to be known when we're talking, and for the purposes of this conversation, when I'm talking about AI, I mostly mean generative AI, and I mostly mean things that look like or behave like ChatGPT.
Sure.
So in that context of AI, one thing that's really important to know is that kind of AI was mostly created for language-based tasks. So specifically translation, but just in general for things that are conversational, that sound like a person talking to you. And so that's important to note as we start looking at how can AI impact cybersecurity, because there are a lot of problems in cybersecurity that we hear AI and we're like, haha, this is going to solve that problem. We can hand it our data lake and it's going to tell us every security problem. That's not really something that this kind of AI is suited for. And in fact, that's something that big data and data science have been doing for 20 years. That's where data lakes came from, is to solve exactly that problem. So there are a lot of problems in cybersecurity that people want AI to be a solution for, and they really just want it to be a solution for that because that would make them a lot of money. That being said, there are places that it is a really useful solution. And I was alluding to that when I first made the point of they're really good at conversational tasks. So one of the things that I've already seen it implemented in is in various SIMs and SOAR products, where they are using it as basically the final analytic layer before an alert gets to the analyst. So if I'm an analyst and I'm looking at a SIM, I'm looking at dozens, maybe hundreds of alerts a day, but I'm also not seeing thousands more alerts that are below a certain threshold that don't actually meet, incident qualifications, whatever the case may be. There are thousands and thousands of data points that are coming into this tool that I'm not necessarily going to want to read through all of those and look at all of those. And what AI tools are really, really effective for doing is taking all of that information that's already structured and formatted. It's not unstructured, a big blob of data somewhere. It's a very clearly structured and metadata tagged and sorted data. But the AI can look at all of that, use what's called retrieval augmented generation, RAG, and basically use those documents to print out, basically use only the context of those documents to give you its result, which means that it's going to give you a very human, very conversational analysis of a very limited data space. And that's great because it doesn't remove the possibility of AI being wrong, but it dramatically reduces the risk of it. And it also means that what it's having that analysis of is something that you can just look at yourself. If you're like, this doesn't make sense to me, you can look at the alerts and see if there's a mistake somewhere in there. So it's a very tightly focused use. It's just taking a big pile of alerts and putting them in a paragraph that a human being can read. But it's what that analyst would have had to spend an hour or more doing, of just manually reading all of those alerts and putting it in a paragraph. So that's the biggest impact I've seen for it. And you see that same basic use sort of spread across all forms of cyber. So threat intelligence has a similar thing where reports are now being generated based on the data being put in. Threat hunt reports being generated in the same way, purple team, red team, all of that. A lot of it comes in that we have the data. Now let's put it out into a formatted form for users. And for a lot of folks, when they first hear that, that's kind of a disappointing use case of AI. They're like, oh, so it's like it's a secretary. And my response to that was like, well, yes. Now you have someone writing your report. You have a secretary. Right. That's such an expensive thing and hard to get. No, I would fight tooth and nail to get a secretary in my current role. It would save me hundreds of hours a month. So yeah, AI is just a secretary in that case, but that's a really powerful use if you're using it effectively. A bit more technical use case that I've started to see, and I'm not convinced it's going to work long term yet, but I'm also not convinced it won't. I just haven't been kind of convinced in either direction. And that's where a lot of organizations, the MITREs of the world, or folks who are associated with the MITREs of the world, who have really large data sets, where they have this the MITRE attack and the MITRE defend and the MITRE DAO, and they use AI to basically take a given attack or a given event and map it across that to quickly give you information about what next steps to take and what process to take. And that gets a little bit more tightly into what a lot of people imagine AI being used for, which is automating that whole operational process from start to finish. There are a lot of questions yet to be answered about that. I mentioned earlier in the reporting creation, if AI makes a mistake in generating its report, I, as an analyst, read that report and say, that doesn't look right based on what I found. I can go check that data. If this AI is following the MITRE process and they're following the kill chain and making changes to my environment and making changes and cutting the attack route, mitigating, do all this, a mistake is much more potentially catastrophic and requires much more human intervention. And so that's where the question, I think, still exists of, will there be too much human intervention required that it's not really worth the expense of implementing AI? Or will we find a balance where, okay, we go from a team of 10 people monitoring this to one person who monitors it, and so it's worth the investment? I'm not really at all convinced that the second case is going to happen yet, but there are a lot of very smart people working on it, and I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt there. Those are probably the two biggest kind of general use cases I would see for AI. Beyond that, when you get into the very AI is going to hack your environment with a brand new ODA, that's nonsense. It comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how AI works. Anybody with enough money to do that can just tell the NSA to hack you. They're already a government. They already have a spy agency working for them. Right. They don't need to build an AI to do it.
Well, and I think people get confused around some of those topics, like a lot of the, quantum computing and all that really is not AI, right? That's a difference in the processor and how quickly and fast and how many records it can do at a time and all that kind of stuff versus AI. I think we have this, many of us have this vision from, whether it's Terminator or whatever, like you're going to have this thing that can out crunch and is smarter, et cetera. But our current version of AI is not that, right? Now, next version, if you go from 3 to 3.5 to 4, obviously there were giant leaps in all of those. 5 is potentially exponentially better than where it is now. And sure, maybe at some point we'll get to that place. But, you even, I've read books and articles around, even on the defense side, using AI and just make it faster, right? The whole point is to narrow down, but I still want to have a human making sure that, hey, this is the right decision. And I'm hesitant to take out of defense, put it into a power utility, put it into critical infrastructure. Am I willing to just give the automation or the computer the right to make all decisions without human intervention ever? Like in the whole thing of OT is automating. Like we are automating and we're building, if this happens, then do this. If this happens, then do this. If this happens, then do this. But all those things, an operator is watching screens and they're seeing those indications come up and they're able to hear, look, feel, taste, smell, all the things that are going on around them and take action accordingly, right? They know, they're trained, they understand what good looks like. They understand when to take action, what to do in these scenarios. You go back to your, whether it's an IR, DR, whatever, my response plan of how do I operate this thing? These are my normal conditions and know what to do. I don't see a time anywhere in the near future where I'm going to just remove a human person from at all. Now, to your point, maybe I'm going to reduce it from needing 10 to needing 2. Can I do that? I can absolutely see that. But I don't see any in the near term future where we're going to have, we're just going to completely automate that thing. And then, I'm done. We're going to walk off, do the next one. And AI will take care of that just like a human would. Like, we're not there yet. I don't feel.
Well, and it's one of my favorite quotes in the whole world comes from Marvin Minsky, and it was in 1967. And Marvin Minsky said, "I am convinced that within a decade, we will have substantially solved the problem of creating human-like intelligence." In other words, what he was saying was we will have Terminator-level AI no later than 1975.
Sure.
He was a little off. So I don't think anybody who makes the claim today of like, we're X years away, we're Y years away, they're just as wrong. And quantum computing is a great parallel here, because quantum computing and AI, and in a slightly different but related way, like things like the metaverse or Bitcoin, all have a similar problem at the heart of them. And I love AI. I have been obsessed with AI for basically my entire professional career. So this isn't just me being like, AI is stupid, we shouldn't do it. But they have a fundamental problem at the core of them, which is that they require such a massive investment and such a massive public adoption to make sense that they really have to reshape the world. Otherwise, they're not worth talking about.
Right.
And so every time someone who sells AI is talking to you about AI, they're always going to be pitching you the future of what AI will be one day. And the fact that we're not there yet is kind of incidental to the current conversation. The fact that like, but one day you'll be able to give ChatGPT 55 total control of your environment. It's like, okay, but today I'm on ChatGPT 4.
Right. And
if I try and do that, it's going to sell my company for a peanut. Like, what are you, and like promise that it's a legally binding deal.
Right.
What are you talking about? And so much of what we have to do as security professionals, and this is why I love talking about AI and hype cycles and security, is our job is not to be true believers, but it's also not to be obsessive skeptics. It's not to say AI is stupid and it's useless. Because I just talked about 2 use cases where a SOC that uses AI to do that first pass analysis is going to work hilariously faster than a SOC that doesn't. I've seen it in our own practice. I've seen it with my own analysts. I've seen it with my own work. Having access to those summaries is much faster and much more. Even in the times that I've had to be like, that's not right, and I have to go back and check it.
Sure.
That's one thing that I had to go back and fix, as opposed to all of the little bits and pieces that I had to arrange and get just so and all. It's so much faster. So the thing that I love about AI, and the thing that we as security professionals have to do, is picking the parts of it that are actually useful and figuring out through all the hype, through all the magical thought and the mythical language about what AI is going to do and the dark AI god that's going to turn us all into paper clips. The reality of it is like, well, mostly what it's good at is taking this very technical data and turning it into conversational data. And that's very useful. That's a very useful thing for it to do. But that's a bit different from solving cold fusion and taking over the world. That's a very different problem set. And your point about, ChatGPT 5 might be worlds better than GPT-4. And it very likely is. One of the interesting things about this kind of technology is basically the more money you dump into it, the better it gets in a pretty predictable way. Which is not true of most technology. If you dump $10 million into making a car, there's not really any reason to think you're going to get a better car than if you dump $5 million into making it.
Right.
Ask the Air Force about their jets. That was mean. But it's with AI, there is kind of that promise of if you dump more money into it, this model will get more powerful. Now, we don't know how long that's going to be true. And that's one of the things that's really interesting, because basically with each form of AI we've seen in the past, where the first version of AI is what we now think of as the internet. It was the idea of like web pages and distributed metadata tagged information that's accessible from across the world. And then AI matured into human level reason, human level thinking. There's never really been one accepted definition of AI. And so then in the 80s and 90s, it kind of got dialed back to basically what we now think of as Excel, the ability to transform data at large scales and turn it into useful human knowledge. That's AI in the 80s and 90s. Then in the 2000s, AI was big data. It was the ability to get to draw conclusions, to make market decisions based on this massive unstructured data. And that is, by the way, when you ask me when we talk about like the most advanced AI, that's still the most advanced AI. Right. The stuff that folks like Goldman and Sachs are using for fraud detection is hilariously more powerful and advanced than anything we're using to give us a recipe in the form of Shakespeare. It's so much more effective and technologically impressive to me. But that being said, so what I think is really likely is we're going to get to, in the next few years, we're going to get to the end of this current version of AI's ability to keep getting better. They're going to dump another $1 billion into it, and it's only going to get $0.1 billion better. And that's not going to be worth it for the investors. But it always leads the seed of the useful thing. And it also always leads to the next version of AI technology. So the paper that popularized ChatGPT, that made this current version of AI popular, came out in 2016. It's not a very, very old paper. There were a lot of other papers coming out at the same time trying to solve those same problems that may spark the next AI revolution. And so we as security professionals have to look at this current AI revolution, this current hype cycle, and say, okay, what can we take out of it? What's going to be useful? What is a risk that we need to avoid? What is the thing that we need to mitigate, manage, and control? What is a third-party risk, et cetera? But also, what lessons can we take from this so that the next AI hype cycle we see, we come into it more prepared and we don't make bad investments, we don't make bad decisions. It's one of those kind of, in my opinion, really cool things about the cyclical nature of AI and security is that if you pay attention, you get to learn from the cycles and do better on the next one. So that's my soapbox about AI and the past and future thereof.
I love it. So I also want to dive into what you just said there. I love the term. And again, it aligns with a lot of things I'm talking about this week as well. And it's that hype cycle. And that may have a negative connotation to some folks. And it's not intended that way, right? It's about the things that we're seeing in the zeitgeist in the current, cybersecurity tools or processes or capabilities or whatever. Obviously, AI being one of those. What are those things that you're seeing today in the current hype cycle that are really impacting us, whether positively or negatively or neutral, even overblown, underblown, whatever it may be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the really interesting things about hype cycles in this context, and the reason why we want to talk about it, is that hype cycles have been a known and studied thing in AI for a very long time, for decades and decades now. And a hype cycle really only refers to AI's relationship with the public, not actually with the growth of the technology itself. Basically, the idea here is the public catches wind of some new innovation in AI, ChatGPT, which actually before ChatGPT was deepfakes that caught everyone's attention.
And now they're just like, oh my God, this thing is crazy, which it's been around, right?
Right, exactly. And so everybody gets really hyped up. We start hearing the predictions of, the global economy is going to grow by 5% because of this, which is a wild and goofy prediction to make about any technology except for like harvesting wheat. Sure. But anyway, so then we move into the phase where it doesn't manifest those predictions. It doesn't give us those things. And everybody says, this technology was actually always stupid and useless and we don't need it. We're going to throw it all away. And then we move into sort of the stasis period before the next hype cycle. So in this current hype cycle, we're right getting into that third stage now, where a lot of folks are starting to say, well, we're spending all this money on AI. Where are all the promises? Why isn't it materializing? Why aren't we getting anything out of this? But folks are kind of missing that we have actually gotten a ton of stuff out of it, like a huge amount. For example, one of my favorite things about this is medicine. In the COVID pandemic, one of the main, I don't want to say the only thing that cured COVID or helped solve the pandemic. One of the biggest influences in the pandemic being solved as fast as it was and the cure being developed as fast as it was is AI. is basically a machine learning model that is similar but not identical to the way ChatGPT is designed, with all of the different pharmaceutical research organizations across the world that were doing research into COVID, pooling their research in one of the greatest acts of humanitarian medical technologism in human history. It's a hard word to say, technologism. But the idea is, that we are seeing in medicine, we are seeing in finance, we are seeing in cybersecurity, these really complex analytic tasks being made not trivial. It's not, I could not develop a drug with the help of AI. It doesn't matter how good the AI is. I'm an idiot when it comes to drugs. I don't know anything about chemistry. But somebody who has a bachelor's degree today now has a much more effective ability to contribute to their team than they would, 5-10 years ago, where they had to manually look up each thing. They had to go through this process. And that's not using ChatGPT. That's just using tools that are built on similar designs to it, where they have these data sets that it's trained on. So we're finding in all of these really niche areas that AI that's not necessarily identical to ChatGPT, but is very similar in the concept and in the design of neural nets that are trained on data sets that are curated, and that generate new information as a result of those data sets. So those are the areas where in really niche fields where we already have deep domain knowledge, where we already have this corpus of information for the AI to be trained on, that's where it's really, really impactful. Most of those places have already been using big data or data science in that direction for a while. So to them, it feels a lot more like kind of a one step up rather than the dramatic revolution that it actually is. But under the hood, it's a really significant change. So that's the biggest area. The other area that I think it's worth calling out is AI is really good for criminals and fraudsters. Like, it's so easy to do a fraud right now. I don't want to advise anyone to do it, but I have seen more fraudulent emails, more fraudulent letters, more convincing frauds in the last 18 months than in my entire career before that. And I saw a lot of fraud before that in my career. It was not a rare thing before that, but it's such a powerful tool. And not just for overtly fraudulent, but there, even for the kind of like shady, 2-person basement consultancy that we see a lot of in cybersecurity. It's very easy for them to all of a sudden have a professional or semi-professional looking presence and statement of work and all of this that can give a client a really, really positive impression of what they can do. And then, they actually work with them and they find out that it's a bargain basement consultancy. So I don't want to say that that's all AI is good for, but it is really, really good for fraud and criminality.
Yeah. I've seen some of that talked about and really diving into it though, right, is the emails you got from the Nigerian prince, right? The language was bad. It was obvious if you really paid attention, it was obvious it wasn't right. But now they can take those same scammers can take that copy, put it into ChatGPT, say this is designed for a United States, they can get specific. I want to focus on people in Texas. So I want to talk like a Texan would talk, or a Californian would talk, or whatever. So that language barrier and noticing
the style of a 60-year-old from Houston.
Exactly. Right. So it's harder to notice, the differences in language and it's very easy to take a tool like this and copy and paste. Right. So, and get out this really a lot better looking, easier to assume is good, especially with somebody that doesn't do, like you and I will probably notice a lot more likely than others that don't do this for a living.
Yeah, we see hundreds of examples a year. Yeah.
Exactly. We get them all the time. We're seeing it we've seen really good ones and we've seen really poor ones. Yes. And it kind of everything in between. But we're also trained to look for those things. Whereas, my grandmother that is, in her 90s, she's just assuming that, she got my wife has even got, the text, you want a Walmart gift card for $100. Just click on this link and sign up. Right. Yeah. Those things are getting better and better. And ChatGPT is definitely a tool, just like anything. And I think that's the good point to really focus on here is it is a tool. It's like a hammer or a pry bar or whatever. You can't just expect the tool to do all the work. Like, you still have to wield it. You still have to do something with it, and you have to instruct it and guide it. And you're going to get different results depending on how good you are with that tool. So an expert, I can take the same tools that a 30-year expert craftsman that builds cabinets. I'm not going to get the same quality. I can buy all of his tools, materials, and everything, and I'm not going to build the same quality of cabinets that he has because I haven't been doing it for the past 40 years. I can't expect to take that tool and get the same results that he does. Absolutely.
And that alludes to kind of the thing that's important to understand here about the way scammers use generative AI. And ChatGPT is one probably the biggest.
Sure.
They're also using things like Midjourney where they're creating images, or they're using video generation. I can't actually remember the name. There's actually like one GitHub project that's responsible for like 95% of all deepfakes, and I can't remember the name of the project off the top of my head right now, which is for the best because I don't want to advertise for them.
Exactly.
But yeah, so it's the thing that you need to know about attackers is they're not just attacking you; they are sending millions of messages out, tens of thousands at least of messages out. And it used to be that wasn't that big a deal because they still had to have somebody on their side writing those emails. And so, yeah, they can A/B test against 10,000 people, but they're looking at a click rate of 0.001% versus 0.0015%.
Right.
It's really just not a big deal. Whereas when they now have ChatGPT, they can give them hundreds of examples of potential uses right out of the gate. Well, now I can A/B test. Now I can do, really good means test, or really good audience testing across all of those different examples and figure out, this one has a click rate of 5%, thousands of times better than anything we've ever seen before. And so that's where, fraud has always had this fraud in the last 50 years has developed this incredibly powerful industrialization to it, but it always lacked inputs because there wasn't really anybody willing to sell their good exploits to those folks. There wasn't anybody really willing to do the hard copy work for them. All of the stuff that we see in the more advanced, like the Russian threat actors who are really, really advanced, who have, assets in country who will write emails and do things for them. A lot of these scam fronts, a lot of these really large industrialized fraudulent organizations, they didn't have access to that before. They were kind of considered the lower rung, the lower class of criminals. And now that doesn't matter as much. Now they have access to that input. And so that's the way in which you call it a tool, and you're exactly right. The most powerful tools are force multipliers. Right. And that's all this is a force multiplication tool. Now, that's not to say it's not a tool that we need to consider carefully. As the Hong Kong case, last year, somebody sold out like $25 million given to a fraudster as a result of a video call where the fraudster used a deepfake to create an entire room full of people who were like, we need this right now. We've got to get it done. It's a secret. It's such a big deal. But if you're a finance person who's never really dealt with this kind of fraud before, and you get on a conference call with 10 people, of course you're going to believe them. Of course you're going to think that's real. So it's that area where fraudsters are now, they get to take this industrial engine they've been building for 50 years, and all of a sudden they have really, really high quality gasoline to put into it. And it used to be they were working with basically just mud, and whatever little bit of fumes they could get out of that mud, that's all they could get out of their engine. But now they have what that engine was designed to run on, and that's a very, very scary thing.
So how does all of this adjust and change and shift as these new emerging technologies are coming in the incident response world, right? So we have all these things and capabilities driving how we have to respond. And we don't want to be too far behind the eight ball, but obviously we are, incident response implies, right of boom, right? The thing has happened and now we're responding to it.
Yeah, and I think the biggest change is that, it's always been true that in incident response, there's always going to be some social engineering element to the attack, whether it's a phishing link that got clicked, whether it's an actual phone call that happened, whether an email went back and forth. There's in almost every incident I've worked across my entire career, and it's been way too many incidents, there's been some element of it that we would classify as social engineering. Now, that's not really an innovative or exciting thing to say. If you work in IR or you work in red teaming, you already know social engineering has been key to the process for 15 or more years. The big thing that we're seeing now, however, is that between ransomware and AI, social engineering is often the whole incident now. It used to be the attacker would get into your environment, and then they would need to get privilege escalation. They need to establish persistence. They need to move through the environment. They need to get all of these different systems. Now, a lot of the cases I see are the attacker got a click by 10 people in the organization, figured out which of those 10 people had access to reasonably important data, and hit with ransomware whatever systems they could get access to. There's very, very little process inside the environment. When I started in incident response, we would talk about dwell times of 140 plus days, where the attacker really carefully mapped out the environment and understood everything, got to know everything. Attackers are now much more figure out what part of your infrastructure is critical, find a way to touch that part of your infrastructure, shut that thing down, move on. There is data exfiltration that still absolutely happens. There's still that theft and that extra ransom, but it is more and more those attacks are getting shorter in their cycle, and they're getting much more tightly focused on just getting that initial access through social engineering. That's not to say there's no technical aspect to it, but I've definitely seen a lot fewer really technical incidents in the last few years. I would also say, from the incident response perspective, one of the things that's the biggest difference is most of the time, the attacker that you're investigating is obviously trying to avoid getting caught. They're obviously trying to avoid the security tools, trying to, act in whatever way is going to be most stealthy. Well, I should say, obviously, that used to be the case, because the case was that the attacker had, some ODA, they had access to this environment, and they didn't want to burn their access. Now, in this age of industrialized processes where they have AI doing most of the first pass stuff for them, they've got a scanning tool finding the low-hanging fruit, and the AI is doing, and they're deploying the AI script automatically. They're not touching anything manually. A lot of that has gone away. So a lot of attacks are getting kind of noisier and clumsier. We're seeing a lot more of those script kiddies who before would be able to hit like 5 companies a month are now hitting 100 or 500 companies a month. And so as a result of that, the average attack is getting a lot louder. That's a good thing from the incident response perspective, in that it's a lot easier for me to find and be like, oh yeah, this person's using a 10-year-old exploit. Like, you should have patched that, but it is also very easy to catch using a modern SIM.
Sure.
So we're seeing a lot of those kind of low-hanging fruits that used to go by the wayside, used to kind of escape notice, are now being hit because the ocean, so to speak, is sort of drying up as everybody is targeting on an industrial scale every possible target.
To put it in sales terms, it's almost like the cost of acquisition has reduced to a point where they're willing to spray and pray more often. Yeah, right. So is it also that they're less worried about maintaining that access because they're more confident that if you clicked on it once, I can probably get you to click on, I'll just change the attack and get maybe not the same person, but somebody in your organization, I'll get access through another way again if you find me today?
There is definitely quite a bit of that. And I think one of the things that's really helpful in understanding this is that it's not so much that old attackers have changed their process as that new attackers who use a process that didn't used to work, now that process works. Gotcha. And so exactly what you're talking about, where the attacker, the sort of attacker that we used to be worried about is somebody who's really focused, really subtle, really attentive. They get one point of access and they don't want to get caught, because if that gets burned, their whole attack chain might get burned. Whereas now when we're dealing with somebody who's willing to be loud, they'll send the same phishing email to 15, 20 people in the organization. And if they get a click through on all of them, they'll start exploiting all of those people at the same time. They'll start hitting all of those at the same time. So it is absolutely what you're seeing. I don't necessarily think it's necessarily because AI has caused a change in practice so much as AI has enabled what we in this field would consider very bad practice.
Sure. Yeah, and it just allows bad, again, that tool is leveling up people that don't have that skill set. Maybe they're not the script kiddies is a great example. And why don't you explain what that is? For some may know what that is and some may not.
Yeah, that's a great question. This is kind of a parallel. So if you using marketing and sales as the example, if you work in marketing sales, you're probably aware of this huge influx of people who have absolutely no idea what they're doing, but have decided that because they have access to ChatGPT and it can spit out their sales script for them, now they're a salesperson. Same thing's happening to us. So script kiddies are folks who we would think of as being not just not very good at what they do, but all they're capable of doing is running a script. In other words, using a tool that someone else created for them. That term got popularized with the low orbit ion cannon incident of like 2005 or something like that, like a very long time ago, where a tool was created, a DDoS tool, a distributed denial of service tool was published that leaked the user's email address. Anybody who used the tool, it was a cracked version, but anybody who used that version of the tool, their email was essentially just sent straight to the FBI.